All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Navigating No Contact with Toxic Parents. I'm your host, Tracy Principi. And today I have a really special guest that I'm very excited about. And this is going to be a great conversation. Today, my guest is Miranda Pacchiana. And she is a writer, social worker, personal coach, survivor of childhood sexual abuse and its aftermath. And she lives and works in Newtown, Connecticut. So, thanks so much for being here today, Miranda. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. And I do want to mention that your website is thesecondwound.com.
It's actually, yes, it's called The Second Wound, and the address is secondwound.com.
Secondwound.com. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then your podcast, you also have a podcast called Truth and Consequences.
Yeah, and you can find that through the Second Wound website.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start with, what is the second wound and how did that come about?
Mm-hmm. Second wound is a term that I coined from my own experiences. So as you mentioned, I am a survivor of child sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, and everyone's story is different, I never forgot the abuse, but I found a way to file it away and go on, compartmentalizing it and not addressing it, because I didn't really have that opportunity until I was in my mid-20s, and I was in a much more emotionally safe place in my life, in a stable relationship with a new marriage. And I had moved away, and I had a therapist I really trusted and had been working with for a little while. And I finally decided I'm ready to talk about these experiences and what they mean. And I was actually in social work school at the time, so it was a very interesting time for me. And I dove into the work with my therapist, with my husband's support, with a close inner circle. And it was, it was really, really hard work, addressing that trauma. I had a lot of emotional fallout from it. I had flashbacks, all those symptoms.
Right.
So moving forward, I began to heal. I really did. I started to feel more whole than I ever had in my life. And I found that as I went on to further address what had happened with my loved ones, with my close inner circle, that was where the problems began. So I was doing the work on what had happened to me, but I was also living in the real world today. And I was finding that the people that I loved the most, aside from my husband and my friends, were really pushing back. And I was feeling unheard. And I was feeling like what I had lived through was being minimized.
Yeah.
So that was really confusing for me. I never expected that to happen. And I spoke up for myself a lot. I fought it. I set boundaries. I worked on it on and off. It became this whole second wound, this whole aftermath of what I had lived through that really never got any better. And in the first few years that this was happening, I'm a new social worker. I started looking at the literature, journal articles, research on sexual abuse and what happens to survivors. And I wanted someone to explain to me what was happening and why. It didn't make sense to me. And so I really could barely find anything that helped me. And I decided I was going to start writing about it. And that's when the first step that I took was to start a Facebook page. I started doing some essays, personal essays that I had published online. And as this community started on Facebook, people found my work and they started saying, me too, me too, me too. This is exactly what has happened to me. I felt so alone. I feel so confused. And I learned so much from them and vice versa. So it's been, I don't know, maybe 5 years now since that first Facebook page. And now I'm on all the platforms and I have a pretty extensive website that talks about these topics. And And it is incredibly common. I don't know what the
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's ever researched it, and
Right.
I have a self-selected population I'm working with that I coach and
Mhm.
hear from online, but it seems to be that it's at least as common to have loved ones and family, fail to support you and re-wound you in similar ways to the abuse than it is to be truly supported and believed
Yeah.
and, have people adapt their behaviors
Right.
accordingly. And it
Yeah.
sounds like, our listeners and followers overlap, so I'm sure that you see a lot of this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, we don't, these dysfunctional family systems, it's always hard to comprehend why the almost always, across the board is the entire system sides with the abuser. And
Yeah.
that, of course, like you said, is can be just as devastating as the abuse itself, the incident, the
Yes.
experience of having nobody, no family members. And then what oftentimes, what happens is these family members say, oh, well, that was a long time ago. You should get over it. So and so has been
Mhm.
really good to our family because a lot of times
Yes.
it's tied around money, and so I hear
Absolutely.
that a lot.
Mhm.
And oh, that they've helped us a lot and all this kind of stuff. So
Yes.
there's that aspect. And then sometimes again, if the survivor doesn't have a memory, or the memories are fragmented, or they have the more implicit body memory, they might think, well, yeah, maybe I should just forget about it and try to make this work.
Mhm.
They get
Yeah.
confused.
Yes. So let me address that, and then we can back up a little
Yeah.
bit, and I can get more detailed about what the common hurtful responses are from
Yeah,
family and loved
that'd be
ones.
great.
So yeah, it is very common for survivors of trauma, including and especially child sexual abuse, which is extremely
Mm,
traumatic, to have fragmented and memories, have flashbacks, have kind of knowledge without the memories attached. These
that's right.
things, the body responses, the emotional responses, but we encode those memories in a fragmented way because of the trauma.
Right.
And a lot of people don't really understand that and may not trust their own what their body and their emotions are telling them, and
Yeah.
especially if your family members are encouraging you to doubt that,
Right.
and they have their own reasons for not wanting to believe this. It
Yeah.
is it puts you on your back feet, and it is confusing, and it is not healthy for your healing.
Absolutely.
So I do just wanna absolutely validate that, not everybody has specific memories like I do, and my memories also are not on a complete timeline where I was this
Mm,
age and this happened, and I was a child for one thing,
yeah.
but, trauma gets in the way of linear, recall.
Right.
So so, I just wanna get to the heart of the matter, which is what are these kinds of hurtful behaviors? And it can start with sounds like you got work
Oh
getting
gosh,
done
I
over
know. I'm
there,
gonna
huh?
have to edit that
Yeah.
out. Yeah, there's trimming trees. What a day.
Oh my gosh. Um, so first of all, tragically, many survivors who come forward flat out are not believed.
Right.
Sometimes there's lip service to, "Okay, I'm sorry that happened," but then, later on, people will say, "Are you sure? It doesn't seem like that person would ever do that."
Yeah.
So the failure to believe, and even what a lot of people don't realize that is even when people do believe you, that is not
Hmm.
necessarily a cure and answer because there is all kinds of minimization that goes on.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, it's time to move on. Um, and what I and all kinds of other, was it really that bad?
Yeah.
Um, can we talk about something else now? Haven't we already gone through this?
Yeah.
Um, And it's not that survivors are drama queens. It's not that we want to live in the past. It's that
Right.
our bodies and our emotions are still responding in certain ways. And oftentimes there is an issue with the actual abuser. We don't want to be in the same place with them, and that is
Right.
healthy and normal. And that happens because we are shedding our denial and facing our truth. So that should be encouraged and supported.
Yeah.
So there's minimization, which is so hurtful, to have the people who love you the most not hear you.
Yeah.
And what I always tell survivors, and this was kind of a revelation for me to come to, because it's not how we're treated. You survivor are the only authority on what you lived through and how you feel now and what you need. You are the authority, and people need to defer to you when you tell them how you feel and what you need and what you lived through.
Yeah.
I wish that happened a lot more. Often we are blamed for we're the troublemakers, right? Everyone was doing fine until you kicked this up, and you keep wanting to talk about it. And we could have had these nice family occasions with everyone invited until you started these problems.
That's
and
right.
That's upside down and backwards, because the problem was started when somebody violated us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Right.
That's such a big, that's a big one too, because I hear from a lot of survivors again that they got in trouble. They got punished for this, somebody violating them. Yeah.
Yes. And again, it's so confusing, and it's upside down and backwards.
It really, truly is.
It's victim blaming 101. And it can happen on a long-term basis.
Absolutely.
So, that's scapegoating. That's treating us like a black sheep in the family.
Yeah.
And so the result that often happens is that we are ostracized. And, a classic story I hear all the time, it's a family reunion, it's Christmas or Hanukkah, and you're only invited, but so is your abuser. And if you can't handle that, I guess you can't come. Or you're not even invited, because they'd rather have that person there. Yes. And that can often go back to what you were referring to before, which is that oftentimes abusers they have dominating personalities. They have a lot of money and power that they spread around and people benefit from, and that's by design.
Yes.
And so we're at a disadvantage when it comes down to choosing one or the other. And that's not necessarily what we're asking either, is to choose this person, don't love this person anymore. We're just saying you need to respect that my trauma needs to be respected.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that said, it's like, where do you go with this thing that, is so insidious in families and then society too? It's everywhere. So the survivor is kind of just stuck holding all of this burden, and they're scared to just, I want to get my voice out because it's hurting my body, and where do I do that? How do I find, a platform where I'm going to be seen and heard and validated? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it is so important to speak and to use your voice, and you do need to find a safe place to do that. And therapy is a wonderful place. There, as you know, there are all forms of trauma therapy and talk therapy. It is often hard to find someone great that you click with, but I would suggest that people keep trying, even if it takes 10 people before you find the right one. And that's hard to do, but it is really important. If you can find support groups as well, again, that's hard. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a support group of survivors. The first support group I was in was just for women, and it was women dealing with anxiety, depression, challenges in life. And I benefited hugely, I think, in some ways, because not everyone was a survivor. And so the fact that they didn't, see me as dirty or tainted in any way, which I was still carrying within me,
Yeah.
that really, really dramatically helped my healing in a way that I couldn't do one-on-one with a therapist.
Right. Yeah.
And come to my website and my online pages and yours and see that you're not alone. Comment if you feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
People will often respond and show you support. Coaches like you and I, that I work with survivors who
Mhm.
are living the second wound, and I am able to understand it firsthand.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I do think it is
Yeah.
so important. And a major reason that I put all this information out there is because I don't want people to have the problem I had, which it was being blindsided and just completely confused.
Right.
And to find out through my discovery that it is a phenomenon, and it
Mm.
has a
It
set
is.
of, they vary here and there, but it has a set of components that are somewhat universal, and
Yeah.
it's not your fault and you're not
Yes.
alone.
Yeah. And going back to that the set of components within these dysfunctional families, earlier you said it is oftentimes, it is about power. I would think that's the majority.
Mhm.
Power, money, and then these people might even be really charismatic
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
um, an outstanding citizen. They might even have lots of
Absolutely.
friends and all that, right? Is there
Mhm.
anything?
Absolutely.
And then within that dysfunctional family, there's that intergenerational trauma at play, right? Where there
Mhm.
might have been sexual abuse passed down,
Yes.
whether
It's
you
a
know the
huge component.
history. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes.
Anything? What other aspects of that make this so insidious and difficult to get
Mhm.
through?
Well, denial is a big
Yeah,
component, and
denial.
denial of, I mean, if you think about it, if someone in your family came to you and said, this person within our family abused me,
Yeah.
or within our inner circle, it's not, necessarily a family member, but
Mm-hmm.
um, that is a very, very painful thing to take in.
Yeah.
It And if you are gonna do the right thing and you are gonna address it appropriately,
Yeah.
there's a possibility it could break up the family, it could break up a marriage, it could reveal this person as an offender to the
Yeah.
outside world. Um, and I'm not saying that that's okay for people to, you know, abandon or betray a survivor for these reasons, but we're talking about human
Right.
nature.
Yeah.
And I do think it helps to understand where this comes from. Okay.
Yeah.
So, um, you know, generational abuse, absolutely. Sexual abuse, it spreads through families, especially
Right.
when it's not addressed. And it becomes
Yes.
normalized, it becomes hidden away and perpetuated.
Yeah.
And when people turn a blind eye to that, it allows it to continue. So, um, oftentimes the people you're talking to have experienced it themselves and they're not dealing with it.
Right.
They don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Maybe it happened on their watch. Maybe they contributed to the environment somehow and they don't want
Yeah.
to look at that. So they would much
Yeah.
rather push you away and label you as the problem, label you as crazy or unstable or
Mhm.
whatever they wanna call you.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of diagnoses that are put on traumatized people as well that aren't necessarily accurate. Sometimes they're helpful.
Right.
But, it's sort of the trope of the crazy woman or
That's
crazy
right.
survivor.
Yeah. That's
So
that's right. Yeah.
Mhm,
Another thing too is that I've seen, within this family system, there could be a sibling, that has also experienced that abuse from that
mhm,
family member that is still
mhm.
siding with that abuser themselves, even
Yes.
though, and so you've got this one lone scapegoat, sibling, where some of the other siblings have also experienced that same abuse, but they're not willing to, go there yet, I guess.
Yep, absolutely. So oftentimes that scapegoat is the person in the family. Maybe they've always been this person in the family who speaks the truth. Often, it's the person who's essentially the little kid in the fable about the emperor having no clothes. It's the one person who's saying, "Hey, wait a minute, he's naked," and everyone's saying, "Hush, hush, hush." Don't rock the boat. And so that sibling who also went through the same thing doesn't have that. I guess at that point in their life, at least, doesn't have it within them to face it the way that you are. And also, they may see all that fallout that you're getting and really not wanna have that happen to them, not wanna side with the person who's being scapegoated, because then some of that will rub off on them, right?
Right. So
But it's
true.
very painful. It's very painful when that happens, and you'd think that you have an ally, but in fact, often it does work the opposite way, because
Right.
that person has more, is really emotionally invested in pushing away what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. Just pushing it
Although,
away.
and I will say, people do change, things do happen. I have seen
Yeah.
it in my own world. Sometimes people wake up to their own histories
Yeah,
and
that's true.
everything changes. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't hold out for that, but I
Right.
also wouldn't assume that there's no hope ever.
Yeah. How often do you see that? Very often with, some,
No.
yeah. I
No,
don't
not
either,
very often,
unfortunately. Yeah, it's
but
unfortunate.
I have seen it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I work
Um,
with clients often who are in their 50s and 60s who are starting to deal with this now, and I'm in
yeah,
awe of them and their courage.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it seems to, I know my trauma didn't come up till my late 40s. So,
Mhm.
not always, but it seems to be this later in life.
Well, 52
Oftentimes,
is the average age that people come to terms with sexual abuse.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
that feels accurate.
Yeah.
Memory might come up or flashbacks might start. Can you talk a little bit more about how, because again, if somebody's never really had, some people again have a little feeling about something that happened, but
Mhm.
others don't. And then, something could come up, a
Mhm.
flashback or so,
Mhm.
and that
Mhm.
can be really terrifying.
Oh my gosh, it really is terrifying.
Yeah,
It can be very dramatic and sudden, like you're saying. You can be
yeah,
wide awake with your eyes open and seeing scenes of things that you
yeah,
lived through that
yeah,
you don't even have conscious knowledge of.
right.
Um, I think that often there are clues along the way that lead up to
Mm-hmm.
that moment. If you
Mm-hmm.
if survivors look back, they'll see, right, I was very emotion I had an emotional reaction to this trigger, what I now see as a trigger, or
Yeah,
my anxiety was building. I was misdirecting my anger for a while there before it happened, things like
yeah,
that. Um, and if that happens, people absolutely need and deserve to get help and support, because
yeah,
it's real and it will get better. It will, and you absolutely do need therapeutic support of some kind, maybe medication, who knows, um,
mm-hmm.
but with those components, it will get better. It's not always going to be like that. And,
Yeah,
it's also the positive side to it is that it's it's like your psyche is telling you you're ready, you have to do this now. And I call it a waking up. It doesn't always look like that.
mm-hmm.
Waking up can take
Yeah,
all kinds of forms. For me, it was like,
right.
okay, I have these memories intellectually. I know I need to share them. And then slowly I began to incorporate the truth. But
Yes.
like I said, it can take different forms. But when you wake up, it's like the beginning of your opportunity to live your life more authentically and to be more in touch with who you are. And
Mm,
that brings you closer to peace every day.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so And then going back to, the body, and if those memories or feelings or some somatic, sensations or something going on with the body in terms of, because some people will say like, oh, I just remember this pillow or blanket or, something kind of abstract, and it really, um, that's all they have, right? But there's something happening in the body with that, and that's where people get really confused. Like, I don't think this happened, because it's very, just these little things, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I would just say, I can't tell people what happened to them, but I would
Yeah,
say most of the time, if your intuition and your instincts and your body and your mind are pointing in this direction, there's a reason for
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And I would
yes,
encourage people to trust themselves.
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really, really important, because there is that lack of trust. And again, if you have other people that aren't supportive, and then
Yes.
you don't have, that linear path, which
Yes.
many survivors don't have any of that,
Mhm.
it can be really hard to say, yeah, I think that's what happened, with these fragmented pieces that oftentimes don't have that linear sensical.
Sure. And if you have the people around you that you would hope support and protect you are
Yeah,
encouraging you or discouraging you from following that trail,
yeah,
then it's natural for people to not want to believe it or not want to go down that path because
yeah,
they're seeing the fallout ahead of them. And that's
right,
really unfortunate. And that's why I hope that there are people listening who might hear this and be able to take into account their own responses to people they care about who've lived through sexual abuse and sexual crimes.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
um, yeah, so important. Let's talk about, what are the options, and if we could, talk about a little bit, what are the options for, if people want, if they want justice, they want, this person is still out there, and perhaps they're harming others,
Yeah,
a lot of times, they might be. And
absolutely. And that's a big motivation for survivors, often more so than their own needs to get
yes,
justice.
yes, that's
Mhm.
right. And it's
Yeah.
just this feeling that, this is, this injustice and this unfairness of this person still being in the community, and everybody's praising them, or
Yes.
whatever it is, and knowing that this person could very well be harming others still.
Very possible because most of the time, I think that there are multiple victims involved.
Yeah,
Um, and
absolutely.
and by the way, I think that there's a misunderstanding that a lot of people don't realize that abusive people are very conscious of the mask they show the world. And you may say that
Mm,
seems like the nicest guy. I would never do such a thing. I
yeah,
know because he's this, and this, and he's so kind and he's so giving and he's so generous. Well, often
yeah,
that's a really great way to get people to trust you and not believe those who come forward. So
that's
you
right.
don't know what's going on when you're not there. You don't know that every side to people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And oftentimes too, I hear, again, from survivors that say, I thought it was just me, and then
Yes.
now I found out this person, has harmed others,
Yes. Right.
maybe in the neighborhood, or other, family members,
Yes. Happens all the time. So
cousins, whatever. Yeah,
yeah, so your question about justice, there's no simple answer to that, but
yeah,
if you do want to pursue, there's the criminal court and the civil court. So
yes,
criminally, you would need to go report it You could start with making a police report, and then you can find out whether or not the statute of limitations would allow that person to be charged. But even if not,
Yeah.
at least you've got a police report. Let's hope the police will take your report and treat you
Right.
respectfully,
Yeah.
and sensitively.
Right.
And then there's the civil path of suing people. Now that assumes that they have means to compensate you if you were to win, that you are able to either pay a lawyer or find a lawyer on contingency,
Right.
who would take your case. And then there's the statutes of limitations are different in every state. And I will direct you to my dear friend and colleague's website, Child US Advocacy,
Okay.
which is a wonderful resource and a wonderful nonprofit. And they are the advocacy arm of Child USA, which is a think tank that fights child abuse, essentially.
Yeah.
And they have a map on there of statute of limitations. You can find your state and learn all about what the laws are in your state. And
Okay.
Catherine Robb, the executive director, she has made a lot of strides, among other many people working on this, to change statutes of limitations by state and open revival windows so that people can sue. Often it's a 1 or 2 year period of time where they
Right.
open that up, and regardless of the statute of limitations, you can come forward and sue. There's also legislation being advocated for that this would happen for adults as well, that they could sue for sexual assault and sexual harassment. Because these statute of limitations, they're a real problem because, first of all, victims carry this for life.
Right.
But just as important, we're talking about very often serial offenders. And we as a society have a public vested interest in protecting children by prosecuting and sometimes suing in order to make people aware of the dangers in this person. So it's a really important movement, and it's got a lot of traction in the last couple of years, which is wonderful. So I would encourage people to look into that. There's another website, and I can't think of which one it is right now, but I mean, I would throw it. There's, RAIN is a great resource. Darkness to Light is a great resource. The Mama Bear Effect is really helpful in helping to educate children and look for signs of abuse. But and I believe it's Child USA or Child US Advocacy have toolkits to help you determine whether you want to, use the legal system and how to do so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really great. So it's really great to know that there are resources out there, because again, a lot of people don't even know that this is, exists, or that there is possible support in going these routes of civil, litigation, right? Or at least something available. Usually, because again, it really isn't about money. It's just more that those injustices, and that this person is still surrounded by people that are putting them on a pedestal.
Exactly. And that's dangerous, especially if they are committing offenses against kids or anyone.
Exactly. And that really kind of insulates them.
Yes, it really does.
Right?
And I think that oftentimes it's like a cycle. People like that are attracted to power, money, fame. Then that allows them to offend and get away with it. And it becomes more and more dangerous.
Exactly. Yeah. And that gets perpetuated in that community or family where that person is existing.
They might be the rock star of the family or of the inner circle, or in their world where they're a success. And people don't want to confront people who are powerful. They often have aggressive sides, right? Because they don't have healthy psyches if they're offending against people.
That's right. Yeah. And they often have never had anybody stand up to them before.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's self-protection oftentimes when people in your inner circle don't stand up for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
often it's not conscious either,
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, to all the survivors and anyone listening going through this, the bravery and courage that it takes to do this is really tremendous.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah.
And my heart goes out to every survivor who has to heal not just from their original trauma, but
Mhm.
from this secondary trauma that it's really important for people to understand that we don't have the same kind of control over it. You know,
Right.
our abuse usually is in the past. It
Yeah.
goes on and it re-victimizes survivors in many of the same ways that we were victimized. It takes our voice,
Yeah.
it overpowers us.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
and it makes us feel different and it shames us.
Yeah.
Um, and knowing all of that really does help. And
Yeah.
as painful as it is, and that won't necessarily go away, it can get better, but we
Mhm.
can live good, happy, healthy lives despite that. I really want people to understand that. Um, in the first episode of my podcast, I tell a story about my 50th birthday party a couple years ago. And it was a really special day. I had a big party in our backyard and a lot of friends were there. And a it turns out my friends had sewn me a quilt personalized for me, and
Mhm.
the friend who organized it took pictures of everyone, in her house working on it, and they presented it to me at my party, and I wrapped it around myself in this symbol of how I am loved and supported and respected for who I am in the world
Yeah.
that I've created.
Mm.
And I know that
Beautiful.
I'm extra fortunate. I do have a wonderful community that I live in.
Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't always work that way to no fault of our own.
Right.
But we can create a new circle of people
That's
who hear us.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. And I also want to just touch a little bit on the people that might still be in this, with the family member, where they might feel, and I hear this too, they love that person because maybe that
Mhm.
person did show love and affection, and some nurturing parenting. So they're
Mhm.
stuck in this place of part of them feels love for that
Mhm.
person, um, and then another part of them feels hate, and so
Mhm.
they're still in this system, very conflicted about that.
Yeah, that does happen, and that's really hard.
Yeah.
Um, and so, first of all, I never tell people to cut someone off or not cut someone off.
Right.
And often it's not a one-time decision. It's
Right.
setting boundaries, it's taking time away, it's trying again. People generally don't want to cut off family members.
Right. It's
It's a
really
very
hard to do.
painful thing, and there's a lot of shame around it. We don't want to admit
Yeah.
it when we do it oftentimes, right? We get judged for it.
Yes.
Um, so I would encourage someone in that position to continue to honor and listen to their feelings as things unfold, to get support and help in psychoeducation in understanding that person's behavior. And, yeah, you're right. People who abuse aren't just always acting like monsters.
Right.
And especially when we're children and they give us love and attention, that's what we know as love.
Yeah.
Maybe true, genuine love isn't in their capacity and that wasn't their true motivation, but that's how we received it.
Right.
And that
That's
was
right.
real. And
Yes.
and that doesn't take that away necessarily. So
That's
I
right.
don't, there's no pat answer to the question, but I would
Yeah.
say keep doing the work, keep evaluating, and using your voice as much as is realistic and
Mhm.
possible, and
Yeah.
honor what you need.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And really just honoring where you're at. Because there's no, it's all valid and it all makes sense. It just makes so much sense.
Exactly. And I don't want people to look back and say, I kept trying with that person, and now I know I have to cut them off. I have to set a firm boundary. I wish I hadn't done that. But that's because you probably have a big heart, and you probably are open-minded, and you wanted to give this person a chance. And
Yeah.
those are wonderful traits in people. Maybe that person didn't deserve it, but we had to find that out by trying.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up. Do you have any last words, comments, anything? This has been so helpful.
Yeah, I want to just make a point that is kind of a tagline of mine, which is, to any survivor in this position, you are not a troublemaker, you are a truth teller.
Mm,
And
yeah.
there's a huge difference. And
Yes.
oftentimes people confuse those two.
Right.
So keep honoring your truth. And it's not an easy road, but ultimately it's the only road.
Mm, yeah. 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 It is. And it really leads to that internal peace and freedom that I don't know where else we're going to get that
Yes,
from, right? It's like this internal thing that
exactly.
nobody can take that away.
That's so, so true. And
Yeah.
it's like you have pain that you carry from these reactions, from the rejection and the abandonment, but
Yes.
you do know who you are, and you do have more peace every day, and you will continue to bring that into your life if you're true to yourself. And you're
Yeah.
not alone.
Absolutely. That's right. Wonderful. Beautiful. Well, Miranda, thank you so much. This has just
Thank
been
you.
so helpful to our listeners. Again,
Thanks.
Miranda can be found at secondwound.com.
Hmm.
And I know there's a lot of resources on that website, so
Yep.
go check that out. And
Thank
then
you.
Truth and Consequences is your podcast that can be
Hmm.
found on wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for being here today.
Thanks. It's been a joy. Bye, Tracy.
Bye.